The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for Wednesday, March 2nd, 2016 are currently trading with gold at $1,240 an ounce, silver $14.98 an ounce, Texas crude $34.40 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 429 U.S. currency. Today in history, the year 1807, the U.S. Congress passes an act to prohibit the importation of slaves into any port or place within the jurisdiction of the United States. However, the widespread trade of slaves within the South was not prohibited since the children of slaves automatically became slaves themselves. The act prohibiting importation of slaves of 1807 went into effect January 1st, 1808. The beginning of U.S. abolition was today in history. In recent news, President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama will both appear later this month at South by Southwest. The president is scheduled to take part in a discussion on March 11th with Evan Smith, editor of the Texas Tribune, on civic engagement and the role of innovative technology in increasing participation in politics and even solving major problems like climate change. On March 16th, the First Lady will be discussing her Let Girls Learn initiative, which aims to help an estimated 62 million girls around the world have access to basic higher education. This will make the Obamas the first president and First Lady to appear at South by Southwest in its 30-year history. Lawyer Jose Refugio Rodriguez said today that his client, drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, said he wants to be extradited as soon as possible to the United States because guards at the Mexican maximum security prison aren't letting him sleep. Mr. Rodriguez is wanting to negotiate with the U.S. authorities for a lighter sentence and a stay at a medium security prison. Instead, Radio Formula reported El Chapo fears that his health will worsen because of the isolated conditions in the Mexican prison and the possibility that the lack of sleep could cause a heart attack or a stroke. The process of extradition may take up to a year. The world's biggest seller of corn and soybean seeds and the maker of Roundup weed killer, Monsanto Corporation, issued a profit warning today. They are forecasting a cut to the midpoint of its fiscal 2006 profit by at least 11%. This is after they announced laying off 3,600 employees, roughly 16% of its global workforce. Monsanto shares recently went down 7.5% and have shed a total of 29% during the past year. This is Rick Brody with your lowdown for March 2nd, 2016.
Rise up, children. Remember the victims. Look within you and see what they've done. Brothers and sisters, angels are calling. Don't close your ears to that cry. Hippocrates said, don't hurt your patient. Modern medicine has forgotten his words. First do no harm. First do no harm.
Well, welcome to the Vaccine Myth and Issue of Trust. Today is Sunday, the 13th of March, 2016, and I am your host, Sean Siegel. We are being brought to you, as always, over the auspices of the Logos Radio Network. Howdy to everybody listening on the network. Listening in their cars or homes here in Austin, Texas, and anywhere else where a station may be picking up the signal off of the website and broadcasting locally. We will go right to our guest. Hang on a second. I'll bring him on.
John?
Okay, I have Steve with me. Hi, Steve. Are you there? And welcome to the show.
I'm here, Sean. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, sir. I'll explain to the listening audience. Steve is an anonymous name for very good reason and very bad reason, both. And it's obvious that there are so many people who, because of their professional status or the status of their kids and the way vaccination is viewed by the mainstream, and perhaps other reasons, feel reticent about talking about vaccinations in public, as opposed to anonymously. However, this is obviously Steve is a real person. He has created an excellent series of articles called A Comprehensive Review of Vaccines, and that's what we'll be discussing today. So, Steve, Tell us what it was, if you will, that got you interested in vaccines in the first place.
Sure. Well, I've followed it for years, probably over 10 years now. And, I saw, the let's say the mainstream message was getting through very clearly, and the message the message that contradicted the official story was really not being heard. And I wanted to get that out there, and because there's a lot of really good information. And if you really, if you go to research vaccines, it can be very complex. And even if you go for a cursory research, you're not going to find out the truth behind it. You got to really put hours, and I would say hundreds of hours into it. And one of the things that there's two things I wanted to do with this article. One was to get the information out and put it all in one place for people looking to learn about vaccines, to hear the other side of the story, the side that you're not going to hear through let's call it the traditional media sources. That was one of the reasons. The other reason was to kind of offer an olive branch out to the pro-vaccination groups and let them see what we're seeing here when we do our research on this. And there is an enormous amount of conflicting information with the official story. And I just wanted to put that out so people would have a little more compassion with some of these people that are, some of the vaccine skeptics, let's say. And there's a lot of people, who saw firsthand their children get damaged with vaccines. I mean, it's clear as day. I mean, doctors are conditions that kind of not connected to, but it's clear to the parents, what happened. They got a vaccination, and whether it be a couple days or a week or a month later, things started going really wrong. And I want to kind of put something out for the people who believe in vaccinations, just to show them what these parents are going through, number one, and what we're seeing when you really research this issue. And this is one of the reasons this article, I want to just, kind of bridge the two sides. And right now we have you have the two sides that are really getting acrimonious. And I just think if people understood the information out there, even the people, the pro-vaccinators, they saw the wealth of information out there, they'd have a little more compassion towards the people that are, the vaccine skeptics, let's say.
Indeed. And we both know very well how many thousands of hours literally are put in by so many thousands of people. So we're talking quite literally, again, about millions of hours of research and being done by parents, very often the case. And people have to realize that parents are the most sincere researchers out there, especially parents of kids who have been vaccine damaged. They're not looking for places to place blame. They're looking for explanation. They're looking for ultimately, hopefully, for cure or at least recovery for their kids. And in some cases, yes, if they've spent many, many thousands of dollars, they'd also be looking for some sort of recourse. But that's not the basic thrust of the great majority of the research that's going on.
And I like to throw something in about research because, you hear a lot of people say, the research is frowned upon, let's say, on this subject. And, ultimately what they're saying is you're not smart enough to research this issue. You're not a doctor. You're not an epidemiologist. But, the type of research that we're talking about, this is, the stuff that we quote in our article, they come right from the CDC or from the pharmaceutical companies. Some of this stuff is, you don't have to be an epidemiologist to understand what's going on in this industry. So I know a lot of people, they frown upon the research, and they tend to they put it down and say, well, these people are not qualified to research this subject, which, listen, I understand, some of this can be very complicated, but some of it's not. It's very simple. It's very plain to see. And it's, again, a lot of the research that we did, it gives you a good picture of how this industry operates, let's say.
Exactly. My own personal research began when I was told, or at least began in earnest, when I was told that the CDC had radically changed the definition of polio the year following the release of the Salk vaccine. That didn't sit well with me because it doesn't take a giant brain. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize that if you want to go ahead through the decades and assess the effectiveness of a vaccine at eliminating or preventing a disease, the last thing you'd want to do is change the definition of that disease when the vaccine's taken out. So that other crucial issue immediately entered the fold, and that was trust. And that's key. And that's why, of course, the name of the show is The Vaccine Myth, an Issue of Trust.
Yeah, well, trust is a great point to bring out, and that runs through our article. We have 12 parts. It's probably in all of them. The trust is gone, and that's the problem. These, let's say, institutions or health agencies. I mean, put so much evidence to show that they're really not trustworthy. And like you just mentioned, you're moving the goalposts during the game here. When you start changing the definition of a vaccination because the vaccine didn't work as well, to make it appear that it's much more effective than it was, that's, to me, that goes right to the trust. And it just kind of shows the intent of the people behind this, what they're doing. And it's not just with polio, it's with many aspects of the vaccine debate here that they're actually misrepresenting the actual facts.
Right. And that's probably the hardest battle on an individual-by-individual basis is breaking through the cognitive dissonance. I mean, once someone can actually realize and really understand what sort of deception or, to be kind, inaccuracies, grave inaccuracies are involved here, then those rose-colored glasses come off, and you can see much more clearly what the implications of all the other evidence you come across.
Yeah, well, you bring up a great point with the cognitive dissonance because that's very true. It's when we went and researched this, a lot of people don't want to even know this. They don't want to come to the conclusion that this is happening. It really kind of changes your worldview, and that can be uncomfortable. It was for me too. I don't want to read this. I would like to see that our health agencies are doing the right thing, and every time you look into it, they're actually not. It's kind of a barrier you have to kind of get through mentally. And once you do, it's not a fun thing to get through, and it's depressing, to be honest with you. And I think a lot of people, just to preserve their own, reality, they tend to have that cognitive dissonance where they just don't want to know. And I find that mostly with the vaccine proponents. The skeptics have gone there and been there and done that. Where the proponents, they really just don't, they don't want to break through that barrier and destroy their worldview.
Right, exactly. Hey, listen, I want to point out, while I'm still thinking about it, that the website on which your series is placed is called Vision Launch, VISION, visionlaunch.com. And the name of the series, again, is A Comprehensive Review of Vaccines. I'm sure you can find it by searching there for either that or the name of the first article, which is Why Are So Many People Choosing Not to Vaccinate? And then at the end of each of these appropriately lengthy articles, you did a fantastic job of thoroughness here in covering this whole topic, sir. And at the bottom of each of those lengthy articles is a link to the other articles. And you can keep going from there. There are 12 all told. And the author's name is listed as Speed the Shift. But once again, it's visionlaunch.com is where you'll find the article. And it was interesting to me, we discussed in our previous conversation that you had researchers working with you too. How many folks did you have helping you out?
We had a total of 4, and that's who Speed the Shift is. We have, we're basically taking, vaccine is one subject we tackled, but we want to look at other subjects, let's say subjects that are controversial. And what we like to do is just kind of, really research it. And we've got researchers, an editor, and myself, and we all kind of get together and we put our 2 cents in it. And for what it's worth, Sean, it's funny because 2 of the researchers were, let's just say they were not pro or against vaccines before the article. And by the time, I would say even before the article was done, they are now vaccine skeptics. It's interesting because they were able to see, and it was part of the scope at hand here to do this research. But nevertheless, I'd say about halfway, 3/4 of the way through, they were not, they were no longer agnostic. Let's say they were there.
Right. Yeah, I'm not surprised. And we both know that it's a rabbit hole that in essence never ends.
Yes.
Also, by the way, we'll be coming to a break here. I know we're having to handle our conversation here a little differently. There'll be a 2-minute break. So when we do break, Steve, I'll be back on the air with you in about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and that'll take place here in just under a minute. Having researchers working with you, not a surprise, not that you couldn't do it yourself, but really this article is so comprehensive. And when we come back in from the first break, I'd like to start, if you would, we'll just start covering the article. We'll have to make kind of succinct, maybe 8 to 12 minutes on each individual section, and see if between the two of us we can't just break down and get to the most poignant aspects. I don't know how else to handle it. So hang on for a couple plus minutes, and we'll be coming to a break here in just a second. Hang on.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Okay, Steve, we're back on the air. So let's go, if you would, right to article number 1. Why are so many people choosing not to vaccinate? I had to chuckle a little bit. Each one of your articles is worth a 3 or 4 hour show unto itself.
Yeah, they're quite lengthy and a lot of work went into them. But the starting with the part one, we're told that there's a mountain of evidence, that's showing that vaccines are safe and effective and beneficial for us. And it's really not true. And what we show in part one of this is some of the people within the industry, and these are not just, these are the people, the editors of some of the most prestigious journals, medical journals in the world, that are telling us that the journals cannot be trusted. And you're talking about Marsha Angel from the New England Journal of Medicine. You have you have Dr. Richard Smith from the British Medical Journal, and then you have from the Lancet, you have Dr. Richard Horton. I mean, these are well-known medical journals and published quite extensively about vaccines. And these editors, they're the editors, telling us that we cannot trust them. And so again, we wanted to kind of show, what is this information we're getting and the quality of it. And the quality is just not there, Sean. And we get into other things for part one of the article also. We kind of just, we show who the vaccine skeptics are. Vaccine skeptics are made out to be these ignorant, dumb people or selfish people, but they're really not. We point out cases where there are people there, scientists, government scientists, that are that some of the largest pockets of, let's say, vaccine skeptics are government scientists who work with vaccines. So what does that tell you? And
right.
Vaccine skeptics tend to be a little more affluent, better educated. And again, we try to debunk that myth of the vaccine skeptic being ill-informed, because they're not. And it's very clear from the information, and we get into that as well. But overall, we just kind of try to talk about the information that we're getting in the quality of it. And it's really, Dr. David Healy is someone we cover in that part one, too. And what he tells us is we're kind of blinded by science. Some of these things that we're told they're very complicated, drawn out, published articles that kind of, like he said, blind you with science. When you look at it with common sense, it's not adding up. And Dr. Healy does a great job of just walking you through how these journals are actually manipulated through, and they're all manipulated because the results are not what these drug makers want them to be, so they fudge the numbers here. And basically that's what we kind of get into the part one of the articles, the information that's given to us. It's just not what we're told.
Right. And I'll mention, too, I thought about it before, should have kicked in, because you'd mentioned going to the CDC, that the references you use, and certainly many of us use as well, are from the CDC, and you find that the results are not always as they are characterized to be in the mainstream. But there's another aspect, too, and that Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, one of the first things she told us in her first interview on the show, when she started researching, she had no qualms with vaccines. She didn't believe, just as the researchers you were talking about, she didn't necessarily believe that vaccines were bad. She was certainly taught in medical school that they are God's answer to disease prevention. So to research, she went to many of the studies used by the CDC to characterize vaccines as safe and effective. But to her surprise, she found that though the conclusion of the study might indeed say vaccines are safe and effective, the body of the study, the text, really didn't match the conclusion.
No, and I think most people start off like this also. They're really not prepared to what they're about to find out. But like you just said also, many of these studies are ghostwritten. So basically the authors of the studies are, I guess they're bought off a name, and their names are put to the studies, but when they're, asked about the study, which Dr. David Healy did, they were not involved in the study. So a lot of these studies were ghostwritten. And he points one out with a drug, let me just find it right here. I'm trying to remember. But he points it out with paroxetine as one of the ones he highlights in the video we put into the article. But basically that study, not only was it, let's say, manipulated heavily, even the authors were, it was ghostwritten. So, how much weight can that study hold when you have these circumstances around it?
Right. And I'll point out real quickly, too, that people may not realize this, but when studies are peer-reviewed, and that's held up as virtually the holy grail of studies, that doesn't mean that the studies are repeated. All it means is that people read through the data and see whether they agree with it or not, and they have no idea whether what's being told them was actually what happened in the laboratory. But the main point is that they're not repeated. The people who review these studies do not repeat the experiments. They simply take for granted at face value what they see and then agree or disagree based on that, unless, of course, you get into conflict of interest, which is a whole other side.
Yeah, and I'll go you one further, too. Some of the studies are just kind of reworked also. So you have an old study that said one thing, that it actually turned out bad for the drug, and they go and they rework it, and then they turn out a new, they'll call it a study, or a new review of it, and like you just said, that they're not, that basically it's spun in a way that's favorable to the drug, where actually the original study did not do that.
Right. The CDC in particular is really good at that.
Oh, yes.
I have an article called The Nature of the Beast, and that's specifically what it speaks to, is the history, going back through 40 years, of the CDC manipulating the study, various studies, to provide a much different conclusion than was first reached.
Well, not to jump ahead too much, but in Part 9, the part's titled Conclusive Evidence Linking Vaccines and Autism, the CDC is caught again and again and again hiding these studies. This is coming straight from the CDC. You have internal emails showing that what they're doing is miscoding, which is basically taking the study and manipulating the data in it. And, that there's evidence of them doing this. It's very clear. If you look at the Simpsonwood case, basically it was a retreat conference that they went, and the conference was all about just changing the results of a study. And there's a website called PutChildrenFirst.org, and they did an excellent job in just documenting the whole Simpsonwood case. And really, the CDC is, caught red-handed among many other times, Sean. The CDC, we all know Dr. Thompson and many other cases where the CDC is really caught just red-handed hiding data and manipulating data. Right. And it constantly blows my mind when I go look at some of the correspondence, in particular in relation way back to the 99 the Verstraeten study, which is the one you were referencing. Really, that the result of that was that Simpsonwood conference. That you look at the emails going from office to office, and they're basically they're almost beside themselves trying to find a reason that the conclusions were incorrect. And I mean, how almost insane it is for scientists, supposed scientists, to design a study. And of course, the study design is the key. You're supposed to put all that forethought into the study design to give you the results you need to get the valid conclusion to the question you're ostensibly asking. And these people, they got their data. It did not give them the information they wanted, and they were just looking almost desperately for a reason that their own findings would be wrong. The whole approach is so unscientific and so unacceptable in the entity that's supposed to be overseeing the health of our kids. Yeah, and this is public knowledge, but not a lot of people see this. And this is clear evidence of the CDC covering up data that goes directly against vaccines, but nobody really sees this. And that's why we want to highlight this, in our article, because, again, you really had to dig to find this information. But when you see it, it's clear. It's very clear what they're doing. Again, this was obtained through a Freedom of Information Act, and like you said, the emails going back and forth leading up to the Simpsonwood conference clearly shows them trying to spin the data, hide the data, and basically, the Simpsonwood conference, for all intents and purposes, was set up to basically manipulate the data to show the public, or let me say, hide from the public, the dangers of vaccines.
Right, exactly. And even in that conference, it was discussed and agreed among the members that the information they had at the time should be revealed to the American public, but they never came and did it. So hang on. Give it about another 3 minutes. We're coming down to another break. We'll be right back. Hold on.
Sure.
Could your pharmacy release your prescription information to marketers? Believe it or not, it's not only possible, it's probably been done. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll be back with loopholes that make it legal for companies like CVS to share your personal health information.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This public service announcement is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Your pharmacy may be sharing your medical information without your knowledge or consent. For example, CVS pharmacies are likely to disclose your personal health information to business associates. A loophole in the law allows it if parties agree to execute a contract to, quote, safeguard the data. Business associates could range from marketers to insurance companies, and while they might keep information locked up, there's no telling how it might come back to bite you. Ask your pharmacy to disclose how it shared your previous data, and request in writing that it not be sold, rented, or shared. And most importantly, take your future prescriptions to establishments that guarantee real privacy. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht. More news and information at CatherineAlbrecht.com.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
All right, we're back on the air. Steve, I would like to, if you would, go to the second article, because this is something that we just don't approach that much, this particular subject, and that specifically is a closer look at pharmaceutical companies, because you've done some extensive transcribing here.
Sure. Yeah, and part two, what we were trying to do is just, again, it's something that most people don't think about when they go to the doctors, where these drugs come from. I mean, everybody knows about pharmaceutical companies, and their ads are everywhere, but nevertheless, they don't really think about, the ethics behind the companies making this. And in this part, we basically show the ethics of these companies. And, when you look at them, you really, let's say this, vaccine proponents ask us to put a lot of faith in these companies. But when you look at the companies, they're really not worthy of our trust. I mean, these companies, let's just say the vaccine makers, have all pled guilty to fraud within the last 10 years, in some form or another, whether it be bribing doctors or hiding data or promoting unapproved drugs to children. So let's just say that the morals of these companies are really not where they should be, especially when we're talking about something as personal as health. And what we do is we outline each company, well, I shouldn't say each, but a bunch of the companies, and just show what their legal, complications they've had in the last 10 years, and what they're kind of their motive. Their motive is really not health; it's profit, and it's very clear when you look at it that they're not trying to get people healthy. They're trying to get profit, and they're trying to get more drugs into more people. And that's a problem, I feel, because, yes, I do feel like there are some drugs that probably help people. These companies, I think drugs are the hammer, everything's a nail, and they think everything needs, everything can be cured with drugs. And again, it's not the case. And as we see in our society today, we have probably the most unhealthy society, and these drugs have side effects that people don't realize. And not to mention that these companies try to hide these side effects, and they do everything they can basically to get more drugs into more people. And they're not coming from any altruistic spot. It's all about the dollar. So right. We try to point that out in this part, and their actions show where they're coming from. It's not something we have to tell you. We basically put the information up there, and all you have to do is read it, and you can see where they're coming from. So
yeah, I'll kick out one statistic. I'm just the first one, and every one of them is kind of mind-blowing. We're talking about Pfizer in this case, and this was back not that many years ago, 7. Pfizer was fined $2.3 billion. That's with a B as in boy. Then the largest healthcare fraud settlement and the largest criminal fine ever imposed in the United States. They pled guilty to misbranding the painkiller Bextra with, quote, the intent to defraud or mislead, unquote. That's critical. With intent to defraud or mislead. And that's the kind of stuff that novels are made out of. How do you prove that? That's the final intent that they desperately, consistently, persistently try to cover up. And yet they couldn't. And that takes a lot of evidence to convince a jury, which I assume there was in this case, that there was specifically intent to defraud or mislead. And then the other thing I can add is simply that why, if you understand that a company that is a vaccine manufacturer that in another arm was fined such an incredible amount of money for such an incredibly devious intent, why would you assume that simply wouldn't happen when it comes to vaccines?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It shows that they push drugs that they know are harmful to people after the fact. So they know that this is happening, and this is not an isolated incident with Pfizer. It's with all of them. I shouldn't say all of them, but a lot of them promoted drugs after they knew they were dangerous to people. And that to me shows that they really don't care. If their product hurts someone, it's more about getting it out. I mean, in some cases, Sean, let's talk about Bayer. They had a product that they pushed out. They found it to be. Let me just pull it up here. The Bayer one was when they were pushing out. I'm trying to just. There's so much here. They with AIDS, and they went and they pushed it overseas because they knew they could not get rid of it in the United States, so they pushed it overseas. I mean, this shows the intent of these companies. These companies really don't care about our health. It's all about the dollar to them.
Right. And do you have Wyeth in here? I mean, that's something that I've kind of stopped on and posted about on my own Facebook page a couple of times over the last year or two, where Wyeth, when they got news that one batch of, I believe it was the DTP at the time, several decades ago, was causing an undue number of cases of SIDS, which is a horror right there when you realize that they expect some cases of SIDS regardless. But in this case, in Tennessee, there was an undue number of deaths related to one batch. Their answer was an interoffice memo within the organization saying we need from now on to take our batches and distribute them to several states. Don't send one batch to one state. That was their answer to that particular problem.
Yeah, so it could be detected as easy.
Exactly. Literally to hide the connection between that particular batch and the incidence of SIDS.
And the other thing we point out in this part of the article is just, the outsourcing of these vaccines and drugs. And, there's cases where, these overseas, the FDA just barely gets to visit the manufacturers in the United States. Overseas is even less. And there's cases where, it's just substandard manufacturing, and they close a blind eye to it. And, again, some of these drugs that are outsourced in China or in India, these are, I don't want to say third world nations, but their manufacturing standards are not up to ours, I believe, and a lot of people believe. And yet they ship these drugs in the U.S. We're the biggest user of these drugs, but I think a lot of people will be shocked to see some of the conditions that these drugs are being manufactured in. And the fact that, the FDA does not even, monitor these. They can't.
Right. No, absolutely. And there's probably millions of people who have that in mind. I've seen comments actually concerning vaccines. And, of course, at that point I go, well, to me, it doesn't really make that much difference. I mean, okay, so maybe the neurotoxins would be more quality here in the United States. That doesn't give me a reason to inject them. But with the drugs, certainly. I mean, there are many drugs out there that help a lot of people. But, yes, indeed, if they're being made in China or who knows where, how do we have control over the quality of the production?
Yeah, and again, the FDA, they just don't have the resource to even monitor, I think it's like not even 2% of this in the United States, never mind overseas. So, again, you have this substandard manufacturing. And like you said, the product to begin with is questionable. So, you have that in the equation as well. So, again, I think a lot of people will be surprised to know this. I mean, there are people who stopped buying dog food because they came from China. Never mind vaccines coming from China. I mean, you're talking about feeding your pet with tainted dog food from China. How about vaccines, And,
right.
Again, this is something I think a lot of people will be surprised to find out.
Right. You have a whole section here about exploiting developing countries as well.
And that's again, it shows their intent and shows kind of what these companies. It shows what they're willing to do to get their drugs on the market, and they go basically into these underdeveloped countries, and it's very cheap for them to do it. And if people die, well, they'll pay the family some money, but again, it just shows the intent of where of what these companies will do to get the drugs out and get them passed. And we have a whole section on that as far as some of these drugs really hurt some overseas people here, and you don't hear about it because the news will just not cover it. It's not something. It's out of sight, out of mind. So it's actually when you do it in another country like that, it's a little easier for them to hide this data.
Yeah, and that's a whole other topic in itself. The reality is certainly with vaccines and with all the other drugs. You just pointed out that the news it's as though they are being instructed to not carry that type of news, so to not publish it.
Yeah. It only makes sense. I mean, that's a whole other article, a series in the article, series. But it only makes sense if you're the news's biggest advertiser, which in many cases these pharmaceutical companies are. I think Robert Kennedy pointed out on non-election cycle years that it's up to 70% of the revenue that these news agencies receive from pharmaceutical companies. And all you have to do is watch the evening news to see that. How many commercials that have these drugs on them, and pharmaceutical drugs. So they're not going to run a story that goes against their biggest advertiser. Certainly not. And I believe it's even deeper than that, Sean.
Yes, I do too. And maybe we can get into that in a little more depth. We'll be coming to another break here. It will be a 2-minute break, and we'll be back after that 2 minutes. Hang on, sir.
Great.
Easy.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Okay, we can move on to maybe part number 3, vaccine policymakers and conflicts of interest. Oh, I'd like to point out one thing, Steve, that really in regard to why parents are choosing not to vaccinate, that once you have a feeling that there's a reason to question vaccination, either safety and or effectiveness thereof, then that is unassailable reason for you to cease vaccinating while you continue to research, educate, and learn. That's all it takes. You, the parent, are the authority. And especially with infants and toddlers, you are, without a doubt, the authority. The doctor is not, regardless of how strenuously they may try to coerce you into vaccinating. The focus, the kernel of truth is you are protecting your own kids. So it matters not how deep that feeling goes. I mean, as soon as you have the feeling there's a question, then that is, like I say, an unassailable reason. You have no responsibility to explain it to anyone, but you do have a responsibility for yourself and your child to indeed continue to research and learn.
No, agreed. And one of the things, back to the trust issue, the vaccine makers are business. They're like any other business, like a car manufacturer or any business out there that relies on trust to sell their product. And what's happening here is, these companies, or let's say the media or the health officials, blame vaccine skeptics for being ignorant, but they should really be blaming themselves because they've ruined the trust. And they've done it over and over in so many ways, and that's what it is. Like you just said, once you have once you can't trust the product, and listen. Are you going to go to a restaurant that that has food poisoning cases? Whatever, a certain percentage of the time? No, you're not going to go back. People need to trust the companies that they frequent, and this is all this is. It's trust, and they've really ruined the trust. So it's really their own doing here.
Right. Well, yeah, speaking of trust, let's see, I'm looking at the top of the page, vaccine policymakers and conflicts of interest, and the picture is several $100 bills exchanging hands from someone with a suit to someone with a lab coat. And that pretty much sums it up, I guess.
Well, that's what, everyone who is promoting the mandatory vaccinations, in every case, Sean, not some of them or most of them, every case has some sort of financial ties to the vaccine industry. And we illustrate that through this part very clearly. Like someone like Dr. Paul Offit, he is probably one of the biggest proponents of vaccines, but, you don't hear much that he's got his own vaccine patents, and he's made a lot of money off of vaccines and continues to make money off of vaccines. And it's not just him. You go right down the line with everyone pushing this aggressive vaccine policy, and they're all, in some form or another, tied financially to these industries. And Richard Pan is another one, this SB 277, which removes exemptions in California. He was directly, involved in receiving money, not just him, but a lot of other legislators to pass this. And it's in this in every case where these doctors are out promoting this aggressive vaccine policy, that they're all tied financially to the pharmaceutical industries. And to me, that's a red flag to anybody. It should be.
Certainly. And I believe the CDC or Health and Human Services, one or both of them, own some vaccine patents as well.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. And the CDC, from my understanding is, I have no reason to doubt it, is that their walls are covered with posters from the manufacturers, drug manufacturers, many or most of whom indeed are vaccine manufacturers as well.
And they have their own, the advisors on their board are paid by vaccine manufacturers also. So it's really incestuous. It's really, it's not just a little. It is fully compromised. Let's just say.
Right. Now, I'm going to read the definition of conflict of interest as you have it published here: a situation in which a person has a duty to more than one person or organization, but cannot do justice to the actual or potentially adverse interests of both parties. What we see in the case of vaccines is almost across the board where, yes, people have conflicts of interest and they are serving the interests not of the public, but of the pharmaceutical companies or of the tenants of the CDC or the FDA or any of the other mainstream entities.
And we also point out, ProPublica.org is a website that now tracks that money is going to doctors, and they do a great job. And you're talking about, I think it was in a 16-month period, $3.5 billion going to doctors from the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, that to me is that's probably one of the biggest conflicts of interest. You don't hear about it,
And what's the name of the site again?
It's on the news. ProPublica.org.
Okay.
And what they do is they basically track all the money is given to doctors here, And I mean, it's astounding how much money these doctors are getting. So it's not just the proponents of vaccine makers, of vaccine policy, but it's just doctors in general. You know, and again, a lot of this has to do with, you know, the doctors are in some form or another, they're distributors for the manufacturing company. So I guess that's, you know, part of what you do is you put money towards these doctors so they promote your product. But nevertheless, it's a huge conflict of interest. And in any other industry, we would be like, wow, this would be shocking. But it's overlooked in the medical industry, which is crazy. It shouldn't be. Right.
Yeah, no, I see an MD basically as standing for something like, say, Merck distributor. You know, especially for all general practitioners and pediatricians and the like. It changes certainly when you get to somebody who is a surgeon or so with life-saving techniques involved, et cetera. But as far as all the drugs and the, in essence, symptom-suppressing ointments and solutions they give us, there's a tremendous conflict of interest. They're giving those out with no nod at all to those things that will actually heal you, like nutrition and other sorts of vitamin, mineral, enzyme supplements, etc. They have no eye on that at all. Their job is to prescribe.
Yeah, and homeopathy is not as a dirty word in the allopathic halls.
Yes, it is.
I mean, there's no way to patent natural cure, so it's just not even discussed.
Right, and I would say that the only mention I would make of it is that in Wylene James' wonderful book, Immunization, the Reality Behind the Myth, she quotes from the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, where in allopathic hospitals, they were losing 30 and 35%, enormous number of patients to the flu, while in homeopathic hospitals, they were losing only 3 or 4%.
Wow, I was unaware of that book. That's interesting.
Yeah. So, you know, regardless of how you look at homeopathy, I would say it's worth it just to keep you from getting the doctor's prescriptions.
You know what it is? Let's just say that the prescription actually does, like you said, it helps the symptom. It never goes to the cure. Number one, and the side effects of these things are unknown. I think some of the companies know it, but they're not known to the public. So it's like squeezing a balloon. You grab one end, the other end's always going to squeeze out of the other side. You can't control it. And I believe by giving so much drugs like this, the unintended consequences of the side effects are just not well known. I think of I think it's Barbara Starfield, who wrote an article who tells us that up to 200,000 people die a year in the hospitals from pharmaceutical drugs and procedures. Again, this is all allopathic. But again, this is not something you hear in the news, but it's out there.
Yeah. I'm looking now at I'm just kind of scrolling down, perusing the article. I stopped at Dr. Offit's research tells us it's safe for babies to take 10,000 shots at once. And he did mention 100,000 as a possibility too. I'm still unclear as to whether he mentioned it after he mentioned 10,000 or before, and he revised the 100,000 to 10,000. But it obviously totally insane.
And Sean, we haven't done tests on 6 combined doses, never mind 10,000 or even 100, you know. So he's telling us it's okay to do 10,000. Meanwhile, we've never done tests showing even 6 combined vaccines, a regular doctor visit.
Yeah, well, right. And even if you take their tests on a single vaccine, typically a clinical trial lasts, as far as the intensive oversight by the manufacturing company, only lasts 4 to 6 weeks. And then they may take, for a number of months up to a year later, reports from the parents, et cetera. But we know just from information from immunologists in Israel, there's a whole team of, they call themselves autoimmunologists, that the autoimmune diseases that can result from the adjuvants in vaccines can delay and display up to 8 years. So none of those tests really are providing us with adequate information.
No. And they're designed that way too, Sean. As some of the editors point out in the first part of the article, the design of these tests are not really looking to see what the health effects are. They're really looking more for the efficacy and within their guidelines. So it's really the tests alone are skewed right from the get-go. And then, you know, from what we see what they're doing, they hide the rest of it. So basically, you never really had a chance of finding the real information out from these tests.
Right. Okay, and we've got about a half minute left in this segment, and the top of the hour break for your edification. That's the longer one. It's 4 minutes, just so you are aware of it. But when we come back, I'd like to spend a minute or two discussing exactly what efficacy means in the realm of vaccines, because it doesn't mean certainly what I used to think it meant. I mean, you think of efficacy in a vaccine, you would hope it would mean that the validity of its ability to prevent disease, but that's not it at all. But hang on, like I say, it'll be 4 minutes plus, and we'll be back.
Well, my baby was a child so strong. Healthy baby, never did no wrong. And we took her to that.
Okay, and the song to which we began to listen as we were coming back in, as always, was They Take My Baby Away, or They Took My Baby Away, by the Refusers, led by Michael Belkin, father of Lila Rose Belkin, who, perfectly healthy and happy at 5 weeks of age, was given a Hep B shot and died in her parents' arms 15 hours later. And we'll make it succinct. It ended up with Mr. Belkin being told face-to-face by the coroner that the brain damage that they had told the Belkins they had detected in Lila Rose's brain would not be mentioned, that her death would simply be listed as sudden infant death syndrome, while the coroner's supervisor carefully monitored the conversation to be sure that vaccines were not given a black eye. That's what the situation was, what it is, and what it will continue to be unless we find a way to do something definite about it. Steve, let's just spend a second on efficacy, if you would. I mean, we would think, any normal parent would think that when they say vaccines are safe and effective, that means they prevent disease, but that's not the case, is it?
Well, this is what we found. They're trying to find that the vaccine produces antigens. And there's a big difference between that and like we said earlier, it's just the overall health of what vaccines are doing. They're very narrow-minded when they're looking at the conclusions here. And antigens, yes, that's theoretically, they say that if it produces antigens, yes, it will produce immunity against the disease. But that's been strongly dissented against. And even the way they test it too, Sean, is just it's they don't do any placebo tests. They don't do the control groups like they're supposed to. We illustrate this in part 5 of the article. Are vaccines safe and effective? And we show you exactly through illustrations how they test these. And in many cases, all they're doing on some vaccines is just removing the virus and keeping all the other adjuvants and the other chemicals in there. So the results of the test will show similar to the test with the virus in it. So basically what they're doing here is they're not really showing you an apples-to-apples test here. They're showing you they're basically creating a control group that has everything the other control group had in it, minus the virus itself. So they're really, it's not even like they're looking for, the health of the vaccine. It's more of the efficacy, which is, I say that in quotes. And even if you look on some of the data inserts, you'll see, like on the Fluval, we have it listed in the article. There have been no control studies that adequately demonstrating trace of influenza disease after Fluval. I mean, here's another one here where they basically say it's not tested. Safety and effectiveness of Fluval and pediatric patients have not been established yet. We're recommending this just 6 months old and older.
Right. It's crazy. Yeah, they simply go by the amount of antibody production that results from the vaccine, from the administration of the vaccine. And you can immediately see how inadequate that is, just from the simple fact, and it's well known these days, largely because of the internet, that many kids who are vaccinated end up developing the same disease against which they're vaccinated, even if their antibody titers read exactly what they're supposed to. So and none of it makes any sense. It's not valid. And as you say, I've seen that before. I'd forgotten which one it was, but Fluval. Yeah, where they literally say that there's no clinical evidence that the vaccine will prevent the flu. I mean, how crazy is that?
Yeah, and people are swearing by these vaccines, but when you really look at the testing and the trials behind it, I mean, it is woefully inept. I mean, in every sense, again, back to the no placebos or the antigens, I mean, it's really, I think people will be shocked to realize that the weak evidence that supports vaccines.
Right. And anybody, you went to number 5. I think I'm on number 4, but basically we're centering on the FDA right now. And indeed, if you went through seventh grade biology, you understand the meaning of placebo. it's an inert substance or something so close to inert that comparatively speaking, it's inert, almost always thought of as a saline solution. But the point is that it's supposed to be a non-reactive substance. And those comparators, as they phrase it, that they use in so many of these tests, virtually all of them, in vaccine testing, are the adjuvant, as you said, or the entire vaccine minus the actual antigen or last year's vaccine. And that is blatantly invalid as an adequate test for vaccine safety. So at this point, to me, we get into criminality. The FDA has no right. They have a responsibility to turn all of those tests down and not approve the vaccines. But that's not what happens at all.
And that's not science. That's not how science works.
Right.
And there's a deliberate effort to do it this way. And like you said, the criminality, that you're not far off with that. In fact, you're dead on with that, because they're deliberately doing this to obscure the results.
Yeah. Yeah, and blatantly obvious. I mean, we have to assume that they got at least 2 or 3 scientists working at the FDA, and that some of those have some say in the vaccine approval protocol. And yeah, I mean, and that's tongue in cheek. Obviously, those tests are not adequate proof of the safety of the vaccine, let alone effectiveness, but just a pure safety. And they should be just as a matter of routine dismissed and not approved by the FDA. But it's pretty much carte blanche. They're all stamped approved.
No, indeed. And that's pretty scary when you're talking about, forcing vaccines on babies. And in many cases, you're giving not just 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 of these vaccines, which there have been they'll come right out and tell you there's no tests for that. And they expect people to be okay with this. And I think, are we that surprised that people are saying, no? Sorry, I've done a little bit of research here, and I see how you guys, handle this, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to use my baby as a guinea pig.
Right, exactly. How about the World Health Organization? We've spoken to CDC and FDA. What about the WHO?
Well, it's all of them, and that's what we highlight that in the part 4 of the article. And it's just basically more of the same as far as the trust goes. And the World Health Organization, you have people on the World Health Organization who own patents on vaccines, who directly benefit from vaccines. And yes, they're the ones who put out the declarations of these, outbreaks and what has to be done with them. But yet they have people that are on the board, basically, profiting directly. Not to mention, I think it's in Part 9 we have it, where they're also caught in a cover-up as well on some vaccines. So it's widespread. It's every agency. Right.
And I know that the FDA gives these ethics waivers to some of the people on their decision-making boards, which is just, itself tantamount to medical criminality again. But I guess I'm sure that the reason they would use it because they couldn't find anybody else that was qualified, which would be BS, basically, because there are, in a nation of 315 million people, there are thousands of qualified people to do some of the jobs they do there at the FDA. And yet they keep these people who have conflict of interest on the board making these decisions anyway, and literally give them these ethics waivers to sign. And I have to assume the same thing goes on at the World Health Organization.
Yeah, it seems widespread in every agency, and that's, I guess it's not that surprising knowing, how the pharmaceutical companies operate, that they would try to get to everybody, and they have.
Exactly. Okay, what else do we have? What's number 5?
Safe and effective, and that's just basically part 5. We wanted to show, these are not safe and effective. If you look at the VAERS reporting system, or you want to look at the VICP, which is the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, they're not safe. And we also get into the efficacy of vaccines. Also, like we mentioned earlier, you have so many outbreaks happening right now, where the outbreaks, basically 80+% of the people are vaccinated for the disease they're coming down with. And,
right.
So we get into that in part 5. It's a real myth going around, whether it be the media or through our health officials, saying that these are safe and effective. Now, yes, some people can go in and get multiple vaccines, and you probably won't notice anything right away. But there are some children that die within days or are severely, damaged within days, and we just don't know who they are. There's no pre-screening for that. You don't know until it happens. So again, while some kids might go through and be fine, some react terribly right away. And again, we just don't know who this is. So they're really not that safe and effective. And depending on who you are, you could possibly even die. Now, I'm not trying to pump that up and make it worse than it is, because I would say on a whole, most people don't die from vaccines. Otherwise, we'd it would show up pretty quickly, and people would notice that. But nevertheless, there are some people that are predisposed to having severe complications with vaccines, and we just don't know who they are.
Right.
So in that sense, you're playing vaccine roulette.
Yeah, and I would add, too, that there's really no way of knowing, since so many vaccine injuries occur months, and as has been mentioned before, they can occur up to years later. You really have no idea whether you've been injured or not from a vaccine. And there are some, I think Dr. Blaylock is one, and Dr. Andrew Molden, I believe, said it too, and he was well-versed in neurology, that every vaccine brain damages is just a matter of degree.
Yeah.
If we would, let's go to number 6. This sounds interesting. What are the real risks of not vaccinating in the U.S.?
This part really hits home, because what we try to do is we break down exactly how much trouble these diseases causing in present day, and what we're told and what is actually happening are two different stories. Like, we start off with the flu. And, let me say where we start off. We just start off on how they present the case. And if you look at the beginning of that part, you'll see a chart that starts, in the 1950s. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong part here. That is, okay, let me back up a second. What we're trying to show here, what the real risks are. And when it comes down to it, it's really not that dangerous. Influenza, there's an article called Flu Myths, and they break it down using the CDC's information, and we illustrate in that article. But basically what it is with the flu, which everybody has recommended the flu, and it's actually one of the most widespread vaccines out there, 88% of influenza deaths occur in people over 65 years old. And then basically it's 3% or less than 20 deaths per year result from the flu in developed nations, by the way. I'm talking about the U.S.
All right, hang on, Steve. A 2-minute break. We'll be right back.
Yes.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
Okay, you were saying that less than 20 deaths a year in youngsters, basically, attributed to flu?
Yes. Yeah, and it's kind of like that with all these diseases. They're all exaggerated. And
right.
And we kind of illustrate it. We break it down using the CDC's information here. And yet these are put out through the media like this, the flu, the measles. You remember the Disneyland fiasco last year, and they really pumped this up to be such a dangerous thing, but they're really being exaggerated. And that's what we try to do in this part. We just show what the real risks are. And I have to say, after the research, I think there's much more of a risk, in my opinion, of getting vaccinated than not getting vaccinated.
Right. Well, I have you may or may not want to join me. I usually have an issue of trust on the show, and it was actually today going to be literally no one dies from measles, with quotes around from measles. And what I mean by that is it's made in the sense that when you take a look at 1960, which you just kind of spoken to here a minute ago, when there was literally one death or so, somewhere between 1 and 2 deaths per 10,000 cases of measles. That is not a deadly disease. It is indeed a classic definition of a benign disease. And a benign disease is one where complications aren't expected and complete recovery is usual. There's not a disease out there, including the common cold, that simply never kills anybody, because when you come down to it, the complications and death from disease don't follow the virus or the bacteria. They follow the person. That if you're adequately nourished and you got enough sleep and all those other good things we know you need to do to stay healthy, then a disease like measles is described like this in documents I've seen for doctors, for diagnosing measles and educating doctors on measles, that in well-nourished kids, measles is a mild cold with a rash that lasts about 3, 4, 5, 6 days. In undernourished kids, it's often followed by complications and sometimes death.
Yeah, and even the World Health Organization points out that more than 95% of measles deaths occur in, third world nations. So,
right.
It's really not this big, bad risk. And it goes right down the line. We take each disease and we show what the real risks are. and they're nowhere near what we're told. And people are getting so scared of these diseases, and your kid's not vaccinated against this or that, and it's really it's really overblown. And that's what we try to just take a calm, rational look at how bad are these diseases, and that's what we do in this part of the article.
Right.
I think again, most people will be really shocked to find out that this is really not that bad, guys. Let's not pit each other against each other here and fight and be so scared here because again, listen, back in the early part of the century is a little different story, but right now it's not the case.
Right, and nor was it the case by mid 20th century in the U.S. And primarily, and pretty obviously, because of the improvements in the economy and the diet, the home refrigerator to keep your food fresh, public sanitation, better water supplies, etc. You can just watch. There's various graphs out there, and all valid, all backed by official government statistics, in which you can see pretty much all of the infectious diseases plummeting. I'm speaking about the mortality specifically, plummeting between 1915 all the way down to into the 40s, by which time they were pretty much regarded as benign. And and opposed to that, we have still on the CDC's own website measles described as, quote, the deadliest of the fever/rash diseases, unquote, just giving such an unnecessary, irresponsible alarm to the notion that that there be a measles outbreak somewhere, when really there's simply nothing to be alarmed about. And indeed, people in the 40s, 50s, and 60s were not alarmed by it. Nobody called the newspaper to spread the word, to light a match. It was dealt with at home. Kids were okay. 5 days to 8 days later, went back to school, and in return, they had a lifetime of actual immunity to measles.
Yeah, we covered that actually. What you said in part 8 of the article. It shows that it was modernity and sanitation and all the things you mentioned, and the vaccines were not even into the picture when these were dropping. The rates were firmly established in a downtrend before vaccines were even introduced. And again, they just, what it is? It's kind of revisionist history here is what we're witnessing. And,
right.
They're trying to take information, and we noticed this throughout the whole vaccine argument. They're taking information and spinning it to a way that scares people and tries to get more people to get vaccine uptake going. Right.
And then they support that with the same sort of invalid education in the schools, in the public school districts.
Mm-hmm. That's what it is too. And it's one of the reasons why doctors. I don't think they connect the injuries with vaccines, because I think that we've all been indoctrinated, particularly doctors, to think the vaccines are great and this and that since we were children. And again, it was beaten into our heads that vaccines are safe and effective, and they do this and they do that. But when you really look at the information behind it, it's wrong. It just does not support that theory.
Right. It certainly doesn't. And from a whole other perspective, if you just can withdraw from the rhetoric for a second, the mainstream rhetoric, and contemplate someone injecting known neurotoxins into your child, you should get a different picture.
Yeah, Sean, too, if we had a very healthy society and we didn't have autism and autoimmune diseases, you'd be like, all right, whatever, everybody seems to be doing well. But, we have all these diseases popping up and becoming worse. And, we refuse to look at vaccines as being a possible cause for that. And in my opinion, they're a big cause for that. And, again, we've been indoctrinated here to think that these vaccines are great. But, it's like when you look at it from a common sense point of view, like you just said, and putting mercury and the known neurotoxins like aluminum in you, it's ridiculous on its face.
Yeah, it is. I have a family member he's retired now, an MD, and I brought it up in a conversation just a few weeks back, and he literally said, we were talking about the elderly population for some reason, and he was quizzical. He said, I said, gosh, I don't know why there's all these neurologically degenerative diseases going on. And I went, what I didn't say, because he knows my opinion, is, well, maybe it has something to do with the neurotoxins being injected into them. Is this rocket science?
And, Sean, we have information showing that this is a problem. We've had it since the beginning, since thimerosal was created. We've had problems with it. Yet, nobody wants to. Well, let me say it this way: they've been covering up this information while suppressing it. But this is not new. So, of course, when you put this into people and you bypass their system and put it right in their muscle like that, and then you talk about the blood-brain barrier and things like that, of course you're going to have these problems. We've seen it. It's a matter of public record.
Right. Yeah, it's It's terrible. We got a terrible situation that we find ourselves in. Let me see. I'm looking up right now. Let me get to it. We're coming down to the closing minute of this particular segment as well. I don't have it, but it's a meme I put up this morning. But basically, it says that it makes as much sense to inject disease. We're not even talking about the toxins now, but just the disease. It makes as much sense to inject disease as a means of achieving immunity, bypassing the mucosal immune system, as it does, or as it would to inject air as a means of respiration, bypassing the lungs.
Yeah, but the cognitive dissonance is there, and people can't see past this. And that's the good thing, though. I think there's a lot of people that are realizing this now, and they're waking up to the fact. And that's why, you see there's a lot more people, questioning this right now. And that's why I think people are waking up and seeing that this is not what it's presented to be as.
Right. And with good reason. I mean, the number of vaccine awareness Facebook pages is growing by leaps and bounds. Cherry Tenpenny site, when I joined it, there were 15,000 fans. It's now starting to approach 180,000 fans. There's a Facebook page in Australia that's got well over 200,000.
There's a spooky new search engine on the internet, and you've probably already been caught in its web. You'd be amazed what it knows and how it gets its information. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll tell you more in just a moment.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This public service announcement is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Spokio.com boasts that it's not your grandma's white pages. How true. Spokio is a creepy website that specializes in digging up personal information about people and their families. It goes beyond public source information like tax records and delves into the deep internet to dig up gems like the names of your children, your age, your home value, your income, hobbies, and even photographs. Then it posts all this information on its website, making it available to every Tom, Dick, and Harry without your knowledge or consent. I highly recommend searching for your own name at Spokio.com and following the procedure for removing your listing. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
Chemtrails.
Looking for some truth? You found it. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't announce the end of the segment. But I was scrolling down in I think we're on number 6, Steve, and coincidentally found a quote from Dr. J. Anthony Morris, former Chief Vaccine Control Officer and Research Virologist, U.S. FDA. Quote, "There is a great deal of evidence to prove that immunization of children does more harm than good." And of course, that pretty much the hair on the back of my neck goes up whenever I see vaccination characterized as immunization, because there's adequate evidence that it's not. But then right below that, they pretty much say what I was saying as we left the segment. Vaccines bypass the natural immune defense system. And there are many doctors who tell us this can be a problem.
He talks about the influenza vaccine showing no evidence that it actually works, really. And it's funny because they say that right on the insert. So it's just, it's hidden in plain sight, if you want to talk about it, like that. It's right there. And but yet we're pushed to push that flu vaccine every year.
Right. It has the most, it's kind of characterized as the most dangerous vaccine because it's got by far the most awards and most compensation has been handed out. But that's only because, indeed, it is given every year to the entire population, regardless of age. So, hands down, it's given so many more times than any of the other vaccines.
Yep. And And again, it's the one with thimerosal in it too, which has been proven, which we show in the other part. What part of that? We've shown part 9 of this article that thimerosal is just, it is terrible, and every single test that's been done on it has shown that it's not it's not good for you. And basically, we still have it in the flu vaccine. And now I've heard that the CDC wants to put in other ones. I don't know if that's correct or not, but they want to bring back thimerosal, which was shown by the CDC itself to cause neurological damage.
Right. Of course, then they came out and denied it. Then they started using the HMO statistics differently and ended up telling everybody that, no, there was no connection. And yet, the following year, they say, well, we're going to go ahead and take it out anyway. And as we know, they haven't really taken it out.
No.
And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Steve, but indeed, most of the flu shots given have the bolus dose of 25 mics of thimerosal, or actually of mercury. It's 25 micrograms of mercury per shot. Those are in the multi-dose vials. But over a decade ago, there's some folks some parents out in California who sent in four vials of vaccine. 2 of them listed as containing a trace of thimerosal, and 2 of them listed as containing none. And they did indeed find the appropriate amount of mics that equate to a trace. But in the ones that said none, they still found mercury, and it was low, but it was still at or above the amount that makes drinking water undrinkable. So even in the vaccines that your doctor may tell you, no, it says on the list that there is no thimerosal in there, it very likely could have. And the point is, we have no way of knowing whether it is or not.
Yeah, and if you have to trust these companies to believe them that what they're putting in this is what they say they are. And again, the trust is not there. There's no reason to trust them.
Right.
You've just pointed out here that that's actually in it when they're saying it's not. So, it's more of the same.
Yeah. Anywhere I would need 2 days to cover the entire 12 articles. But you cover some of the contaminants as well. I mean, there's last year, or I guess now it's been 3 years ago, a batch of Gardasil was recalled because they found literally particles of glass in it. And we go back to SB40. There's all kinds of things been found in vaccines.
Yeah, we mention it, and probably a lot of the parts, but we don't really get too deep into that part of what's in it, because the adjuvants, I think, the one part we really get into it is in part 9 with the vaccines and autism, and that's where we get into the aluminum, we get into the mercury, we get really heavy into that part. As far as the other ones, we didn't get into as much as we do in part 9.
Right. Well, God knows there's enough in all the others, beside the unknown contaminants that are unfortunately dangerous themselves. I usually point out that it's a triad of information. One is the CDC's own definition of autism, or explanation, more to the point, where it says autism is caused by a brain difference. And then it goes on to say we don't know what causes that brain difference. And it doesn't say whether that brain difference is genetic. It makes no further explanation. But then I go to Health and Human Services and the vaccine injury table, which tells us that both the DTaP and the MMR can cause encephalopathy. And then the third part is the definition of encephalopathy, which, of course, is brain damage, malfunction, or disease. And again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to put those three together and realize there's at least an obvious possibility that a vaccine could cause autism.
Yeah, and it's even stronger than that. But I think what they're using now, that autism word is such a politically and emotionally charged word that you stay away from it. And it's called encephalopathy now, or encephalitis. But in my opinion, it's all varying degrees of neurological damage and what it is. And they just can't use the word autism anymore. And if you notice, the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program stays away from that as well. They did a few cases in the beginning. They did payouts that I forget exactly if they use autism or not, but it's kind of a known thing that if you want to get a judgment from the courts through the VICP, don't even mention the word autism. So now it's encephalitis, encephalopathy, swelling of the brain, but these are all neurological damages is what it is. And to me, there's conclusive evidence. It's not just to me. It's public knowledge now that there's conclusive evidence linking encephalopathy and vaccines, or mercury in the vaccines. And we get into that part 9 in great detail.
Right, and possibly aluminum, because as you mentioned, because the DTaP, as far as we know, has no thimerosal in it, but it definitely has aluminum in it. In fact, one of the two DTaPs, I believe, has 2 different forms of aluminum in it. But regardless, it definitely has the aluminum, And it says that the DTaP itself, which is given well in advance of the MMR, can also cause encephalopathy.
Yes, and actually, I just saw something coming out this week showing that the DTaP on the insert, they now have listed as one of the side effects in plain words is SIDS and autism on the DTaP.
Whoa. Okay, I know there was one. It was called Pediarix, and it was listed once, and it was in the list of post-marketing reported reactions. And then Pediarix is no longer listed as a solo vaccine. It was incorporated by the manufacturer, I think it was GSK, into another one of their vaccines. You know, but of course we know that what the manufacturer will say is, oh, it's a reported reaction. There's no evidence that it's actually associated with the vaccine. You know, there's no proof that it is. And of course, the first thing I'll always point out is, well, of course, there's no proof that it isn't either. So we have to find some other metric to use.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. There's an article that just came out, when is it? On the 10th of March, and it shows the insert itself, and it says right here, adverse events reported during post-approval use of Tripedia vaccine include idiopathic trimethylopathic purpura, SIDS, cellulitis, autism. I'll email it to you when we're done, but that just came out this week.
Right, okay. Yeah, Pediarix, maybe that's the one I'm thinking about. But is that still offered in the U.S. as a solo vaccine?
I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure that it isn't, but I could sit corrected. But the point is, even if it isn't, it's still incorporated into another one anyway. So you're going to have the same consequences, plus more, because it's had an additional antigen added. So, I mean, the whole thing is pretty gross, actually, when you look at it overall. Correlation between vaccines and infant mortality. Boy, I was going to mention this before. There is, it seems to me, adequate evidence to assume at this point that the lion's share of SIDS cases reported in the United States are literally vaccine-induced deaths.
Yes.
But hang on, sir. I don't want to miss this one. 2 more minutes, and we'll be back. Hang on.
All easy.
Steve, let's stay on SIDS, if you would, just for a second, because I'm looking at the graph. You have 2 graphs in a row. Right above them, it says, this study suggests that vaccines may be the actual cause of death for some portion of infant deaths attributed to other causes, including SIDS. And, of course, my comment spoke more to, well, not just some of the deaths, but probably most from what I've seen. And, of course, the graph shows, the first one shows, has about 20 somewhat industrialized nations, certainly including the U.S., pictured by the number of vaccines given in childhood, infancy, toddlerhood, and childhood. And United States certainly has more than anybody else, followed by a graph showing the incidence of sudden infant death. And as you can see, the United States also has more than anyone else.
And we even listed Part 5 a study that showed a correlation between the DTP and SIDS, not the DTaP. That's the previous one.
Right.
So there's evidence out there showing this. Yes.
Yeah, and there's talk about bringing the DTP. You know, there's been so much talk lately about the DTaP being somewhat insufficient. For various reasons, 2 or 3 or 4 different reasons. And people have even mentioned, I've seen it mentioned in articles that maybe they should bring back the DTP because though it has more problems associated with it, it's also better at preventing pertussis.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that most of these pertussis outbreaks they're having are in unvaccinated children right now.
Right. Well, and that absurdity that in the study that was put out by the FDA a couple of years back, that if you get an AP vaccine, DTaP or TDAP, Tdap, that if you're exposed to pertussis later, you'll tend to develop an asymptomatic infection. You won't know you're infected. Nobody around you will know you're infected, but you'll be spreading the disease to everybody.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah. And when you think, in contrast to that, how many parents now, and I've seen them over and over again, who insist you cannot come see their newborn unless you've been vaccinated.
Yep.
And it's very likely that, indeed, the vaccinated are the ones spreading it. So you'll get it either way. I found a couple of studies there that basically say if you have an asymptomatic case of pertussis, it's associated with both multiple sclerosis and celiac disease. So then you start getting to a whole other deeper question: is if you develop an infection, this goes for measles, for chickenpox, all of them. You develop an infection, but because you've been vaccinated, you can't develop the old traditional symptoms. That's not a good sign. That's a disability, not a benefit. And instead of reaping rewards, you may reap consequences down the line.
Yeah, well, Susan Humphrey brings out a great argument, and she basically says that by circumventing these natural forms of diseases, what we're doing is we're losing that natural herd immunity, or just the natural way that this gets into your body. By doing that, you're actually you're making it worse. And chickenpox, she points out that people who get chickenpox as they get older is much more deadly, and the cases of shingles have gone up because she correlates with the vaccination with chickenpox. But yes, I think what we're doing is circumventing nature here, and we're seeing some unintended consequences, or something. We're not really again, we think these vaccines we're curing something with, but I believe we're making it worse.
Right. Same here. I can go to chickenpox specifically. Came across one study that said, for some unknown reason, there seemed to be a growing number of outbreaks of chickenpox in the vaccinated, but they tend to be weaker cases, and often the pox never reach the I can't think of the name of the stage, but it's basically where it develops a head, like the head on a pimple. It never reaches that stage. But then when you think about it, that stage is the healing stage. That's the stage at which toxins are being released from the body. So when you say that it doesn't reach that stage, it sounds on the surface, on the face of it, like a benefit from vaccination. But at this point, I view it as a disability because, once again, you're not developing the full symptomology of the disease. And those symptoms are literally constructed or mounted by the immune system to bring you back to wellness, to eliminate the infection, cleanse the body internally, and bring you back to a state of wellness.
And there's also evidence now. I'm trying to find where we have it, which part. I'm going to go down it now. But some of these might be adapting to here we go. I have it in part. Let me see. This is in part 6. Basically saying that, okay, so now what we're doing is we're really aggressively vaccinating, and it's much like the overuse of antibiotics. They're finding that the strains are becoming resistant to the antibiotics. The same thing might be happening with vaccines, and vaccines have antibiotics, or some have antibiotics as well, and they're showing that that some of these are adapting here. And there's a study here. Let me just see if I can pull it up. Where is it? It's in part 6 under the quote under Dr. J. Anthony Morris we were just talking about. But basically it's saying that the study was showing that this might be morphing. And that's the whole other problem we have to deal with now, because now you have, you're giving all these vaccinations, and maybe these strains are morphing, and maybe that might be why a lot of these outbreaks are happening within the vaccinated children.
Right. I guess you mean something like parapertussis instead of pertussis.
Something like that, yes.
Right.
So these are all unintended consequences. And you know what? At the end of the day, we're not studying this like we should be, so we don't really even know, and that's the scary part. So again, it's all about vaccinate and vaccinate more. There's never a point where we pause and say, hey, let's stop and look at what we're doing here. That's not how they're operating here. They want to just give you more and more, and as you see, the schedule has gone up from, it's gone up like 400% since the 70s, and they just added, I think, 3 or 4 more this year to the schedule. So it's more and more vaccines, without even knowing the proper information behind what these vaccines are doing.
Right. Oh, and knowing that regardless of what you think the percentages are, some people are severely suffering, including watching their kids literally die in their arms.
Yeah.
If you would, we only have about 3 or 4 minutes left here in the final segment. Steve, let's jump to the last, for the moment, the last article, which is Vaccines, the Greater Good or the Greater Greed Conclusion. And I think we've already discussed the greed element in this pretty well. I mean, I think that it goes beyond that. And I would only point out that perhaps maybe the perspective is there's more than one type of greed. There's a greed for money. There's also greed for power and control. And that the folks who actually are at the top of this, we'll call it a pyramid, just because that's commonly used. At the top of that pyramid of the entire vaccination paradigm, of all those organizations, the few that actually control the public face and control the paradigm in that they're propelling the entire protocol of vaccination and helping to expand the number of vaccines, that those people don't need the money, that there's other motivation involved. Now, certainly, with the great number of people who are actually implementing vaccination, the doctors, nurses, most of the people in the governmental agencies, they think they are doing the right thing. They think they're being altruistic, and or some of their income is dependent on it. But they don't think they're doing harm. And that's only because, as we pretty much discussed, the lion's share of vaccine injuries occur well after the actual fact of the vaccine. Otherwise, nobody would ever vaccinate.
Yeah, we touch upon it in the last part. We don't get into big detail, but it certainly seems like there's something more than just money behind this. I have to say that, just from looking at it all, and these heads of these companies are not stupid people. They're probably overachievers. They're probably the more intelligent of people that you run into, and it seems like there's more than just money happening. This is more than just money. This is happening before, because again, some of this stuff is just so blatant. I mean, if I'm not an epidemiologist or a doctor, and I see this just from the research, they obviously see this. So there's more to this. So, again, you can speculate, but again, is this a eugenics program? I don't know. It's definitely something. If I had this, if I had to put a gun to my head and make me choose, I'd say there's more to this than meets the eye. And money is one part of it, but I think there's a bigger, more insidious, reason behind this, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I do too. And one of the people that I quote once in a while is Dr. Calacarinos, Archie Calacarinos, who, of course, saved hundreds of lives in the Australian outback by administering vitamin C to kids either right before or right after they got vaccinations. And like I say, in doing so, he saved half the kids who had been dying. And when he reported back to his superiors his success, he was met with hostility and derision instead of joy and exuberance, as you would think would be the case. And in a very long interview, he ended up at the end of it saying, after 40 years of doing this, I can only conclude that the World Health Organization and all these other global organizations are that their goal is murder and genocide. He literally stated it.
Yeah, well, certainly the evidence points that way. I have to say, it's not just about money. It's just, again, some of these things are clear to anybody, especially to these companies. So there's got to be more to it than that.
Right. And anyone who takes a look at all the information, such as your totally comprehensive article, would have to at least face the possibility. Hey, we're in the closing seconds, literally just a few seconds left. Thank you much for what you're doing and for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Sean. I appreciate it. Thanks for what you're doing, too.
All right. Take care, man. Talk to y'all next week.